Hello there, good evening, and a very warm welcome to COP26, to this side event organised by the EU's DG Employment and Jobs, and all about making sure that the path to carbon neutrality is fair and does not increase social inequality all across the continent. My name is Maeve McMahon. I'm a reporter for Euronews based in Brussels, and I'm delighted to be here with you tonight, live from Glasgow, for this pertinent discussion. Over the next 60 minutes or so, we'll be hearing from politicians and policymakers and also interest groups and NGOs to hear exactly how they foresee this transition to net zero and climate neutrality. We also want to hear, of course, from our audience online and, of course, from you guys here in the room. So for that, we will be using Slido throughout the next 60 minutes. So hopefully you have that on your phone. But now let's bring in our panellists. So we can head over to Brussels and say hello to EU Commissioner for Jobs and Social Rights. That's Nicholas Schmit. Good evening, Commissioner. Can we see him?
Good evening.
Good evening. Lovely to see you there. And here with me in the studio, a warm welcome to local professor Jim Skee, also IPCC board member and chair of the Just Transition Commission in the Scottish Government. Good to see you there. And joining us from Germany, representing the European Parliament, we've Delara Burkhardt. She's a German socialist member of the European Parliament. Welcome.
Hi, sending greetings from Berlin.
Yeah, busy times in Berlin for you, I suppose. So we're looking forward to hearing the political take from Berlin and from Brussels, and some insights from Jim, but also for a more expert and a research point of view, we're also joined by Sasha Gabazon, who's here with us here. She's the Executive Director of Women Engage for a Common Future International, and that is a non-profit network focused on a gender-just and healthy planet. Lovely to see you there. We also have next to her Laura Patterson. She's the People and Organisational Development Director from Net Zero Technology Centre in Aberdeen, which is an organisation developing technology for an affordable net zero energy industry.
Hi there.
Lovely to see you. And we're also being joined tonight by Piotr Szymanski. He is the Director for Energy, Transport and Climate at the European Commission's Joint Research Centre. So welcome, Piotr.
Hello, good evening.
Are you in Brussels tonight as well?
No, I'm in the Netherlands.
You're in the
I'm
Netherlands.
based in Patton.
Well, lovely to have you there. Thank you so much for joining us. And thank you, of course, to you joining us online. As I said earlier, we want to hear from you, your questions or your comments or suggestions for this transition. So please get in touch throughout the panel and use that Slido as well. But first, we can head back to Brussels and bring in the European Commissioner for Jobs, Nicholas Schmit, and get his take on how he sees things. Because, of course, the EU is here in Glasgow presenting its big Fit for 55 package to fight climate change. It's the largest legislative package ever seen at EU level, deemed extremely ambitious. But, of course, you're the EU Commissioner for Jobs and Social Rights. So how are you making sure that this package puts people first and it will be fair?
Well, good evening, everybody. It's a pleasure to be in Glasgow, even if it's only online. First, I would say this Fit for 55 is absolutely good for people, because if we are not doing this, it will be a catastrophe for everybody. So this is a big challenge, and we are all aware that we have to be successful. There is no alternative, because the alternative would then be a catastrophe for everybody, for jobs, for growth, for our social and economic cohesion, and that at a with a planetary dimension. Now, certainly, this is a big transformation, economic, social, technological, and this has an impact. And we have to deal with this impact, especially also at the social level. Jobs will disappear, we have to say clearly the truth, but we have to work on how can we mitigate this, how can we replace these jobs, and they will be replaced because there will be, as we are changing in a way the economic and social paradigm, there will be a lot of new jobs coming up, and we have to prepare people to take up these jobs. The young, absolutely, through the good education, to the right education, but also those who have to switch from one job to another. And there is another issue, that's the territorial. because people will be impacted in a different way, but also territories, parts of Europe, regions, and above Europe also, will be impacted differently. And we should not just leave these regions hit by this transformation behind or alone. We all speak about the coal regions. We have to help these regions to have a successful transformation, economic transformation, by creating new jobs, by giving people the opportunity to take these jobs. And my last part is, yes, if we increase the price for CO2, and this is, by the way, happening now, we have to protect the vulnerable groups. We have to protect even the more middle wage earners. It should not be the feeling that now the cost of this transformation has to be paid by low income or middle income wage earners. And this can be done. This means that we have to put into place the different instruments. Now there is one proposal on the table, the Social Climate Fund, with 72 billion euros. We have an instrument which is underfunded, but I think this will be a next stage, the Just Transition Fund, and especially also for investment and the modernization, but also for the social accompanying of these policies with the Recovery and Resilience Fund. So I think we have the possibility to be successful on the Fit for 55 and at the same time to make it a just transition for everybody.
Okay, Commissioner Schmidt there, thank you so much for those opening remarks. We can bring in now Professor Jimsky and turn to you, our hosts here in Scotland, and ask you what exactly are you doing here locally to make sure that your transition is just in Scotland and in the UK?
Yeah, well, there's a lot happening at the moment, and I think the first thing I would say, we actually, as of May in the new government, we have a Minister for Just Transition, Employment and Fair Work, which as far as I know is the first such portfolio to be created. And it was one of the recommendations of the Just Transition Commission that I chaired from 2019 and which reported in March this year. So that commission, I should say, we are not the government. We are appointed by government but proudly independent. And we made that point a couple of times actually in writing to ministers. But it was 12 people from different sectors, included trade unions, environmental NGOs, business, local groups, and a scattering of academics in the process. Now, the distinctive thing about Scotland, Scotland left coal behind about 5 years ago. So necessarily we were taking a much broader view of what just transition was about. It obviously extends into the oil and gas industry and other sectors as well. But we were also, we're focusing on the consumption and the demand side of the equation as well. So what kind of impacts did it make on consumers and people at different levels of income? So we had a much broader definition. And I won't go tediously through the 24 recommendations we came up with,
don't.
but the government said it accepted in their entirety. But there were 4 areas in which we put them, and one was about planning. And our observation was that unplanned transitions are unjust transitions and tend to be such. So one of the things that's been picked up by government is a just transition planning framework, and then there will be a set of just transition sectoral plans, starting with energy, but the land use and agricultural sector is another one that's been picked up, would be particularly important. We had another theme around skills development, which was obviously about training, but we also see a lot of obstacles in getting people moving from one part of the energy sector to another around certification and qualifications, and there are barriers that can be lowered there. We also emphasise the importance of doing this at a local level. People experience things in their communities at the local authority level. So there were several recommendations about how to enhance agency at that kind of level. It all can't all happen in Edinburgh and Glasgow. And then the final area that we really picked up very strongly was the question of who benefits and who pays, and frankly the money bit of it, and how that comes in. And we are very aware, for example, that there are existing inequalities in Scotland, which could potentially be addressed through the transition, to look at the opportunity side. And we picked up the questions of energy poverty, fair work, and other aspects around and land tenure was the last one, which is really tricky in Scotland because the concentrated nature of land ownership. So we're concerned, for example, that all of the transition so far, which has been quite big in Scotland, has been loaded onto electricity bills, which is quite a regressive way of imposing the burden. So these were the kind of areas we've come out. The government said that it's going to pick them up in its entirety. And the two sort of institutional recommendations that were picked up was first this new ministerial portfolio to try to pull it together across the government system. And then the Just Transition Commission is going into a second phase, but with a redefined set of terms of reference. So one of them is we recommended there should be independent scrutiny and advice for ministers. So one of the jobs will be that independent scrutiny to see whether the government is living it up to its recommendations. There will be a big task on monitoring and evaluation, developing indicators for just transition to check them over time and see how they're coming through. And then finally, we're also invited, to engage with communities as we did in the first place. We didn't have a single meeting in a windowless office in Edinburgh and Glasgow through our first phase. Before we started meeting on Zoom, we were actually going around the country, meeting with farmers, meeting with oil and gas workers, etc. So nice. That's where we are. It's actually quite exciting. We say we've produced 24 world-beating recommendations. Now all we need is world-beating action, and then we'll be there.
Absolutely. Okay, great to hear there from Jim Ski that you're out and about with the people, exactly where you need to be. So we'll come back to you a little bit later. But now we're going to head over to Berlin and bring in our MEP, Burkhardt. Because, of course, the European Parliament has a huge role to play in this Fit for 55 package as co-legislators. And, of course, the Fit for 55 package, just in case you're not aware, is, of course, under negotiation. We could be negotiating it for years, hopefully sooner, though, rather than later. So what will you be looking out for during those negotiations? Because, of course, it won't be just the Committee of Environment who'll be scrutinising this, but also the Committee in charge of Social Affairs and Jobs and Employment.
That's very true. So first of all, thank you very much also to the Commission for giving us the stage and also to put the Just Transition on so high on the agenda, because I think it's crucial. And I really was impressed when I heard that Scotland even has a Just Transition Minister. I think that would be something that would be good for Germany too. But anyhow, I think what Mr. Ski already also said is that when we are thinking of the concept of just transition, we already have come a long way, because in the beginning it was mostly understood as he described, helping coal-workers, coal-dependent regions in the transition towards a clean energy future. So we now see that the concept is now being understood increasingly broadly. So we know, and also the Commission is addressing it a lot now. The question of energy poverty, for example, has gotten in the focus, which is very important. But we also have to see, and this is what I want to address also as an MEP in this process, that energy poverty does not affect everyone equally. It also has a gender bias. So inequalities that also are caused, for example, by decisions we make in transport or agricultural policies. And climate change and our answers do have really gendered effects. And yet until now, and this is something that I want to change also together with my colleagues in the other committees, is that the European Green Deal and its policies right now are not able to properly address these issues. So what I would like to address or problematize here is that the European Green Deal is indeed right now gender blind. And I think if we want to make this, Franz Timmermans always says, leave no one behind in this process of transition. If we want to make this reality, I think we need a broader approach of understanding the concept of just transition in the heart of the European Green Deal. Just transition that does not only look at jobs, particularly in male-dominated economic sectors, but also at enabling participation in society and also fighting inequalities in general. Because a just transition that does not take into account the challenges, the needs and the opportunities of half of the population is really much in danger to increase this inequalities, or at least perpetuating them. So we saw that most of the proposals from the Green Deal are right now at the table, and now is the crucial time to address this question. So we will start negotiating between the different groups, between the different member states. And I was wondering, how can I, as a MEP, start to tackle also, or to address this, the climate crisis, the social crisis, inequalities, gender inequalities that are happening at the same time, and how can we make the European Green Deal something that is implementing the gender just manner? So I am really happy, and I'm really looking forward to later, where because I found partners to address this with Friedrich Ebert Foundation, with Women Engaged for Common Future, with the European Environmental Bureau, where we plan to draft a study that really looks deeper into these issues and propose concrete solutions that we as policymakers then again can use and make the European Green Deal gender blindness something of the past. So the official launch of the study will be on the International Women's Day next year, but we today will hear some points of it already from Sasha. So I think this is a really a very crucial point. How can we make the Green Deal, the understanding of the just transition in the Green Deal, really also taking social inequalities in a broad scale? This is what I'm looking at in the Parliament.
Okay, thank you so much for that. Is the Green Deal gender blind? That's a question we'll be coming back to a little bit later in the panel. I'm sure you'll have a lot to say about that. But for now, let's bring in Commissioner Schmidt again over in Brussels to get his reaction to that question. Do you think it's gender blind?
Well, perhaps the gender dimension has not been sufficiently taken into account. I admit this. And certainly there are, but the gender issue is in many areas, and including also in this, in the Green Deal. So I think we have to have a comprehensive approach to provide absolute gender equality, including also when we are dealing with the Green Deal, and especially this is very much linked to poverty, and this was mentioned, energy poverty. Who is hit? Very often poor families, very often single parent families, and when we are saying single parents, it means single mother families. So I think that this is something we should take into account, because this Commission is very committed to gender equality, and on wages, on pensions, on all opportunities. And we should also be very, very clear on this gender dimension of the Green Deal.
And Commissioner, I guess the big question as well for you, for the European Commission, but also the Member States, is how to engage stakeholders and people and bring people on board. What is the roadmap for bringing people on board along and speaking to the people about the transition?
Yes, I think this is a crucial issue, because if we all know, and this is shared by a big majority of citizens, that combating climate change is essential. But at the same time, a lot of people, they put questions on how this will be done. And if we do not give people the guarantee that it will be done in a fair way, that the distributional effect sounds a bit technocratic, but the distributional effect of this Green Deal is not in an equal and fair way, done in an equal and fair way, we will have a lot of opposition, even if people basically agree with the Green Deal. So I think the social dimension of this Green Deal is absolutely crucial if we want to take people along. And if we do not succeed in taking people along, then the Green Deal will enter into big trouble.
Okay, important to take people along or the Green Deal will enter into trouble. Commissioner Schmidt there speaking to us from Brussels. And just on that point about bringing people along and including people, I'd just like to ask you a question because I thought it was quite curious. Yesterday I spoke to some locals here in Glasgow and they said they felt a little bit excluded from this event, that they weren't consulted, that only about 2 weeks ago they got a little slip in the door about the logistics and how it might be a bit of a nuisance, but they said they would like to go. Like one hairdresser told me that he's rolling out these vegan products, he's trying to reduce plastic, and he would have loved to have come and shared expertise and learned from an event like this. Do you think that was a mistake to not include him and others?
I actually haven't been out.
And you're not the government.
I haven't been out to the green zone because I've been so busy, actually. But I hear, it could be better populated and advertised probably than it has been, because that's the place that, where you intend you to have that kind of relationship. But one of the things that I might say, the phrase "leaving no one behind" is one that we feel a little bit uncomfortable with, because it makes it sound like you're dragging a reluctant child through a supermarket. That's not what it's about, and that was part of the agenda we had with our localisation set of recommendations, that it wasn't about pulling people along, it was about giving them a sense of agency and an ownership of the process. So we're inclined to leave the phrase "leaving people behind." We'll leave the phrase behind as well and approach it slightly differently.
It's a bit like the phrase "build back better." A lot of people don't want that either. They don't want to go back to what we had pre-COVID. They want to go to a more sustainable future. Yeah. And just as you mentioned that, because that's of course the famous phrase from Frans Timmermans, are you aligning your policies with the European Union's Green Deal and their just transition? Are you swapping notes, or are you more going your own direction?
We're swapping notes and going in our own direction. I mean, one of the things we noticed, because we did get a study done to see what other people were doing in other parts of the world, and one of the things that struck us very much is that many just transition initiatives tend to be at a regional or subnational level. The scale of the Ruhr, Upper Silesia, Galicia, or Scotland, it's that kind of level. There's something about a polity of just a few million people, a small number of millions, that kind of makes it more workable because people can work together more readily. And I think you do need to tailor things to the local context. There are a few principles you can follow, but then when you get down to the detail, it's got to be local and specific.
Okay. Jim Ski there. Thank you so much. Let's bring in now, if people want to check into Slido, and we'll try and bring up a Slido question for our audience to see what you all think about this and if you have any feedback or input for our panelists so far. So the question that I would like to put to you and invite you to put a word in is, what for you is the biggest challenge to ensure that the transition to net zero is fair? So what is for you the biggest challenge to ensure that the transition to net zero is fair? So you can pop a word in there, and a little bit later we will get our panelists to react to that word and trigger a bit of debate around that. But now we will bring in some of our female members of the panel who've been a little bit quiet up till now, as we've been focusing on the more policy and political side of things. So let's start with Sasha Gabazon, the Executive Director of Women Engage for a Common Future. Can you just briefly tell us what that organisation does exactly?
So we're a global network of feminists working on a just transition, looking at climate and environment, and we work in 50 countries, and including in the EU. Yeah.
Okay, well, lovely to have you on the panel and to bring this perspective. And I guess my first question really is, what our MEP said earlier, do you think that it's gender biased, this transition?
Absolutely. I mean, when it was published, there was no reference to gender. And therefore, I'm very happy that the Lara has already said that we are working on a guidebook, the Feminist European Green Deal, which will be published in March. And we hope that can bring some impetus for the plans for the implementation, because we know that having a gender-just Green Deal will benefit society, economy. Currently, many of the new jobs will be created in renewable energy, for example, 6 times more than in the old energy sectors, which were very concentrated. And these new jobs, we want these jobs not only to be for boys and men, but also for women and girls. But we are still lagging behind on women and girls in STEM, and we have great differences in salaries still in Europe, and we have 3 times more care work being done by women, so they have less opportunities also to become decision makers and part of the workforce. The energy sector has only 20% women in the workforce, very few CEOs who are leading in large energy or infrastructure companies, so there's a long way to go to really make these sectors more inclusive. And I think that's one of the issues we're looking at. But of course, we're also looking at having to address the underlying problems. So if you look at our current economy, energy poverty was mentioned. And it's, of course, part of the issues that when a city like Barcelona looked at who lives in energy poverty, indeed, we see that it's mostly single-headed parent households, mostly women-headed households, and then women with disabilities, elderly women, women with a migrant background. So it's really about a very intersectional approach to inclusivity and understanding what we need to address if we want to make the Green Deal really inclusive. So not only subsidies for Tesla cars, which would mostly benefit white men, because women have less car ownership in Europe, but indeed really focus on the underlying needs for a social redistribution. And so, yeah, that's one of the issues we will be looking at in our study. And I can give you a few examples if you would like.
Yeah, a few examples and perhaps a couple of recommendations. Like if you were writing the document inside the European Commission, what would you put on it to make sure it was more gender neutral?
Well, we looked at 3 sectors, the most climate impacting sectors. So we have energy, agriculture, and transportation. And agriculture, for example, as you know, still takes a huge chunk of the EU budget. And we subsidize farms. Big farms get more subsidies than small farms, and big farms are also more energy intensive. And so what we are recommending is to look at, okay, who are in the small farms? We see that 40% of the, many of the women's farms are smaller farms. And we would like to really have a cap on the amount of subsidies going to farms, maybe 60,000 euros in total. And then really support the smaller and medium-sized farms to transit to a more climate-friendly agroecological system. And then you would benefit at the same time the women farmers and the smaller farmers. So that's one example. In the transportation sector, we have the smart and sustainable mobility strategy. But this one is also not gender responsive. And also here we talk a lot about e-mobility. So there also we would like to have a stronger gender focus and really a very strong focus on public transportation and supporting also fair, affordable and safe public transportation. And in the energy sector, of course, we need to look at the the Renewable Energy Directive, which is going to be revised. And there we really should focus on these prosumer models. How can each citizen become an energy producer? And how can we support women to enter into renewable energy cooperatives, which they create in their communities and take leadership there? So yeah, these are some of the recommendations we will be working on further. And of course, we have a lot of great policies already there. We heard about the Just Transition Mechanism, but which is not sufficiently funded. We heard about the 50-50 package with a social climate fund. But there also really we need to align that with our policies such as the gender equality strategy, the anti-racism action plan, the LGBTQI equality strategy, and the disability strategy. And I think then we can really have a redistributive, strong, sustainable Green Deal for our region.
Okay, so I guess you're looking as well very much so at member states around the continent, because of course there's only so much the European Commission can do. They can provide nice papers and documents, but of course it's back in the EU capitals where things need to get implemented. Well, thank you so much. You got a lot out there. So we'll bring in now Laura Patterson from Net Zero Technology. You have been working previously, I think, as well in energy-intensive industries and sectors, of course, that will play a huge role in this green transition and that are often actually male-dominated. So how's that been, and how are they getting ready for the transition?
Indeed, so there's a lot of cultural change that we need to start focusing on within the energy industry, and focusing more on cross skill sets as well. So not just on those who've worked in certain areas, but starting to think about transferable skills. So skills like communication skills and skills that are much more transferable. Things like societal impact skills as well. So you talked earlier also about the hairdresser, thinking about the products that they use and being mindful of what you do in your day-to-day job, but also thinking in innovation. So I work for the Net Zero Technology Centre, where we look at technologies to drive net zero future. So thinking about how you can drive your own change and think about the innovative technologies that are there. My organisation is also looking at a cultural index, so working within the energy sector across a number of industries to think about how can you change your mindset, to think about different skill sets to come on board. We've talked about gender diversity, so how do we increase the gender diversity in some of the traditional male-dominated organisations, and even thinking things through. Sasha mentioned salary and benefits, and making sure that we are fair in what's offered across there, but having organisations take an inside look at their own cultures and making sure that they adapt for a just transition.
And how are people feeling? Are they concerned their jobs will disappear?
Absolutely. I think there is a lot of fear from those currently in the energy industry about, what will their future look like and what will the jobs be. I am part of the Energy Skills Alliance, which is a UK body that is looking at what do we do to address that. And there are 4 things that we're looking at. The first is, how do we think about the jobs for the future? So we have done a recent study, and we predict there'll be 4,500 new jobs by 2025. In different areas of the energy industry. The second area we're looking at is STEM, so going to schools, starting to focus on young girls into gender diversity and thinking about energy in a different way, rather than thinking about it as an oil and gas career or a renewables career, thinking about the skill sets that you could use across all of those industries. The third thing we're looking at is an all-energy apprenticeship scheme, so that you can transfer on your career, and thinking about the future as well. So how do we start to build those jobs for our future pipeline? And lastly, thinking about the transfer of training and standards. So Mr. Ski mentioned earlier about the transferability of those, and we need to make sure that we build a system that allows people to move across different industries in the future.
Did you want to say something there?
No, that's fine. I mean, it's actually that we just found so many examples of barriers to moving across. And it even comes to things like, the way that companies write their job advertisements. The temptation is to do it incredibly narrowly and say, what have you done in the past? Whereas what you might think is to look for a broader range of skills and then undertake training for new recruits as they come in. And that's a way of sort of lubricating and easing the transition.
Okay.
Absolutely, and that's part of the cultural change as well that we're talking about. So writing job descriptions differently, operating slightly differently with this in mind, that you're thinking about cross skills.
I'd like to hear from the European Commissioner, Nicholas Schmid, as well on that aspect on the skills. But first I'm going to bring in our final panellist, Piotr Szymanski, who's joining us tonight from the Netherlands. Piotr, you carry out independent research on behalf of the European Commission, and your research has shown that there's still other issues to be taken into account in order to make this transition a success. I'm thinking of energy taxation or carbon pricing that could affect certain groups, especially low income and lower middle income households. So can you just tell us a bit more about that and how your research can kind of fine tune these climate change policies that can contribute to a fair Green Deal?
Oh, thanks very much. It's a very important question, but since we heard from preceding speakers a lot, let me try to first. No, I'm not a Director General, not at all. I'm just a Director for Energy, Transport and Climate in the Joint Research Centre. Joint Research Centre is a part of the Commission. It's Directorate General, in fact. We've got a number of thematic directorates. I have the honor to lead one of them. Regarding locations, we've got colleagues working in Brussels, but also in Hell in Belgium, Karlsruhe in Germany, Ispra in Italy, that's close to Milan, Sevilla in Spain, and last but not least, Petten in the Netherlands. We also do a lot of laboratory works in these locations, so technically, I guess, I'm from Brussels, but that's the reason why I'm talking to you from the Netherlands. The main point which I would like to ask all participants and generally people listening is to give us a feedback on our scientific work. I will explain a bit what we do. First of all, we are providing independent advice to the Commission on policymaker. Why independent? Because we are part of the Commission. We serve only the institution. But of course, we cannot cover everything. Our role is knowledge management, is to get information, knowledge, which is all over the world done, NGOs, universities, institutes, and make sense of it. It's quite complex sometimes contradictory, and then provide our political masters, and Commissioner is one of them, with scientifically based advice, options. Now, what does it mean, scientifically based advice? First of all, we try to see consequences of various policies. It's modeling, analysis of developments, and then we move out from the dry technocratic approach, trying to include more and more the human dimension. And we heard a lot about energy poverty. That's one of the elements which we try to study and also to measure. We heard about prosumers and encouragement of Europeans to participate in the decision making, because that's another huge change, which people stopped being just users of energy, they became active players. All that, let's address just try to mention the just transition. This is extremely important in all the aspects you've been mentioning, and not only that. We heard about subsidies. How do we distribute subsidies to people who are already in difficulties, where they don't have time, they don't have attention time, they don't have a possibility to think how to insulate their homes, how to profit from the subsidies. It's one of the challenges. Mm-hmm. You covered so much ground that I don't want to just narrow our...
Just Piotr, I'm just going to stop you there, because of course you've covered so much ground, so it's hard to get it all out. But what would be the 3 or the 2 main findings from your research that are most alarming?
Yes. I'm sorry, it's exactly the type of a question which is a difficult. Because, no...
Well, if you want a minute to reflect upon it, I can leave you to reflect, and we can...
No. This is an issue of essence of scientific advice. We produce thousands of pages of analysis, graphs, and reports. Okay. Out of that, we try to distill the advice which is digestible by the reader. But we need, already at that stage, the input from all people I mentioned around, people we heard about, people working on studies on what we produce and feeding into our knowledge so we can provide the better advice. So the first meta-conclusion is the scientific advice, scientific analysis, topical. It's not purely economic. It's not purely employment. We have to holistically cover the issue because it is multifaceted, multidimensional, and have various consequences. We had, for example, the gender bias of certain policies. So scientific advice to start with at the early stage of development of the policy in the countries or policy in the EU. Second, holistic approach to this scientific advice and inclusion of knowledge around. And the third one, the more we base policies on science, the better chance is to make the transition just. Because we can identify consequences, we can see that poorer households will suffer, and we can devise the measures to compensate for it well in advance, so we can be proactive.
Okay.
We, meaning science, based on science, the policymakers. We can help to make the transition just, anticipating potential problems. I hope that's the main message. I will not get into, for example, our detailed studies on, I've seen batteries, I've seen the storage. All these elements are being studied by Joint Research Center, and we provide advice based on knowledge available in the world.
Okay. Thank you very much. You've described it perfectly. Is this all making sense to you?
It is. Just to say, the first phase of our Just Transition Commission was not deeply analytical. It was about stakeholder engagement, and a very wide range of people came together and understood each other's problems, and that was quite interesting. I spent 10 years on the UK's Committee on Climate Change, and I characterised that as a committee of policy wonks chaired by a politician. The Just Transition Commission was the other way around. It was politically attuned people chaired by a policy wonk, and that was a very different way around. In our second phase, we are going to have to get much more analytical, because we have this monitoring and evaluation function, which means that we're going to go deeper into the analysis and do the things that Peter was talking about.
But even though sometimes, and I'd like to get the take of Commissioner Schmidt and our MEP on this, is that sometimes, like, to prepare the documents, to prepare the policies, it takes so long, and time is passing, and the crises are there in front of you. Nicholas Schmidt, can I hear your thoughts really on that, like on the speed? I mean, the time to act, as we're hearing, is now.
Yeah, this is I think one of the major difficulties. I visited yesterday and the day before yesterday a member state, Slovakia, and this was the issue. Everybody's saying, well, we are in favor of the Green Deal, but it's too short. The adaptations are too short. But the point is that we have no choice now to say, well, the objective should be achieved not in 2050 or 2030. We should do that 30 or 40 years later, because we know that there is a time bomb ticking. And therefore, we are now in a process which has to be rapid, and we have to make sure that these transitions are achieved in a record time. And therefore, we have to invest a lot. Public investment, private investment. This Green Deal is a change of paradigm. And therefore, especially also in relationship skills, we have to invest a lot in people's skills. We have to allow them, as somebody already said, to transit from their jobs to new jobs. Green jobs are important, but green jobs, what are green jobs? Sometimes green jobs are just in the construction. If we want to isolate buildings, well, we need more construction workers being able to handle the new materials to isolate our buildings. Or we have central heating installers. Well, this is a classical job, but with the new technologies, new ways how we heat our buildings. And so we have to reskill a lot of people in the context of the Green Deal. But this has to happen in a very, very short period. But at the same time, we have new technological tools, because we cannot separate the change, the transition, the green transition, from the digital transformation. And I think here the digital transformation, the new technologies, including artificial intelligence, can be helpful to accelerate this green transition.
Fascinating, right? The role of AI, yeah. I mean, how do you see it?
But I would just like to come in on the other comment, is that it's also how you recruit. And I really like the idea of you have to recruit with much broader criteria. And there are some really great examples from energy companies who said, we want more diversity on our workforce, and who really managed very successfully to bring women with a migrant background into their companies, and they reskilled them or skilled them. And it was a very positive and very fast process.
Especially in the Netherlands, right, where you are, there's great examples.
Yeah, and then in many countries, Nordic countries as well. So I think these 162,000 jobs we're going to create with the renovation wave and energy efficiency. There could be many jobs also for women, young people, who are currently maybe really missing in that sector. And so it's about reskilling existing workers, but it's also about new jobs for new generations and for more diverse workforces.
You're agreeing there?
Absolutely, yep. So we do see AI jobs and data and analytics and digital transformation across a number of different sectors. So not necessarily just green jobs, but across the whole piece. And it is about skilling up people to be able to take on those roles.
And a big challenge as well to get people digitally literate. I mean, there's so many people, if you speak to farmers in the west of Ireland, for example, they're screaming that they're in rural parts of the country, they can't even get good connection. They're being obliged to fill out all their forms digitally in order to carry out their work, and they can't do it. And they're looking, in fact, often to Brussels for solutions for this training. I mean, who should step in there?
May I step in here for...
Absolutely, yeah. I know it's tricky when you're joining us remotely, but absolutely, Piotr.
Oh, thanks very much. It's very kind. So I told you a bit how we work on a broader scale. It's not ages for such analysis. It's not a day. It's not a week, but we are already talking couple of weeks, months, sometimes a year. Second, Commissioner said we are confronted with a very short time scale, and already things are happening. I've just called a number of studies done by the JRC with very concrete results and recommendations. For example, renewable potential. This is translating into the jobs, sometimes totally different, sometimes, as Commissioner mentioned, already existing skills in installing the renewable energy production. We've done the study on consequences of coal phase-out in 42 coal-dependent regions in Europe, looking also what are the potential jobs available in various areas, because it depends on this. We are talking about gender. We've done the study on women in transport. So this is just a bit of the appetizer, what you can find on the Science Hub of the Joint Research Center, and information of the broadness of the scale, that we really do whatever we can with the current scientific toolbox, ranging from economics, real solid science, solid hard science, physics, chemistry, technologies, up to societal dimension, influence on citizens, and also the empowerment of Europeans. As you mentioned, digital exclusion, transport exclusion, lack of connectivity. These are things which, together with colleagues from policy DGs, which study and help to mitigate and improve. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Piotr. Okay, let's bring in our Slido that we asked you all earlier to look at, and bring in a word and see if there's anything we can catch from it. So if we could just bring up the Slido there. The question was, what is for you? So our audience here in Glasgow at COP26, and also our audience online, what is the biggest challenge to ensure that that transition to net zero is fair? Flexibility was the word that jumped up at me there. And inclusion, absolutely, inclusion. So let's bring in our MEP and head back to Berlin and get you to comment on that.
Yes, that fits very well, especially when I see, I only can see the very big words because it's very not clear to read.
Inclusion, social justice, businesses,
yes.
not
and I think
impact.
this is, yeah, I think this is the crucial point, because, and I would stand up for the phrase "leave no one behind" on that take, because of course the time to act is now, and we need to be fast, and we need to act now, because we know that the effects of inaction will be felt by most vulnerable groups first. So it's not only a question about Europe, it's already the question when we see the Green Deal as being something that is also responsible to go beyond European borders, as we see, not talking about effects that will happen of the climate crisis in the future, but we also already see people losing their livelihoods right now. So the time to act is now. But having the social dimension in the core of what we are doing within the Green Deal is crucial for that, because we also already see different reactions of people when it comes to tackling the climate crisis. So, of course, a lot of people, when I look at German cities going to the streets saying, yes, we need a car-free city, etc. They want the climate action not to be fast enough. So actually tomorrow everything should already change. But we also see a big group in society that is afraid of the changes that come. And I think I respect that, and I take this serious, because I don't want people to be afraid of the climate neutral future, because it's a chance, as well described by a lot of people, but it is not guaranteed that it's a chance for all if we don't put the political framework for it to it. So this is the crucial question. How can we make renewable energies something that is also used by people who live in social housing, not maybe having the decision what kind of energy system they will get in their house, how far they are with when it comes to question like energy efficiency. So we need to look that if we change now the regulatory framework of it, which is our task, because we have done not too enough for a long time. So if we look at this, we have to see that everyone will, no one will left behind, but it really is a chance for everyone, for those who live in social housing, for those people who might not now know how to pay the energy bills, for people who don't know how they can move forward if there is no car which they can take because it's too expensive and there's no infrastructure to have a e-mobility car. So this is the question. It's about the question of inclusion. It's the question of accessibility, of availability, of alternatives for everyone. So this is the crucial question. How can we make this transition something that is including the society and not making the polarization of injustices even more bigger? So it's a crucial question. I'm really happy that the panel also is seeing this as the main challenge.
A crucial question that, of course, needs to be addressed immediately. I mean, when you're, as a policymaker, I guess the tricky thing is striking a balance between creating policies that are fair and that, you know, people are so different. If you're someone in Kreuzberg in Berlin and then you go a little bit outside Berlin, it's massive. It's a massive difference there. So everyone's kind of going in a different direction. So it's about bringing kind of rural Europe with you. So I guess you and your kind of colleagues there, when you're deliberating in Brussels, are you concerned that we're going to see more waves like the Gilets jaunes in France a couple of years ago?
This is exactly our task not to, because this is everything what is on the table. When I look at the Fit for 55 package, of course there are some people saying there is the danger of something like Gilets jaunes happening again. But if we are doing the frameworks right, it is not. Because why did the movement start? Because people were afraid that they cannot pay their gas. So this is the question. And how can you make people less scared of this effects of higher energy prices? You can offer them alternatives. So how we can guarantee that is that we put the social dimension in the heart. And yes, the parliament already said it. Sometimes we are a little bit worried with some aspects of the Fit for 55 package when it comes, for example, about the carbon pricing in transport and heating. So this is a question where we have to see that one price for this within Europe will have an effect that might have big power to polarize the situation in Europe even more, because we know the costs of living are different in the different European countries, and it's a bigger burden for people with different income. So this is something we have to look at, and we have to be honest about. For example, the social fund, maybe not right now having the right volume to challenge or to address these injustices that are inherent when we put this pricing in this crucial sectors for all people. So I think this is the questions that we have to ask ourselves and have to make sure that we have the right political tools to not make movements like Gilets jaunes happening again. But this is not something that will be prohibited by or be avoided if we look about inaction. because we know if we don't act, the cost of people of the cost of prices, of energy prices, etc., will even go higher because there are no alternatives, and there's an end of coal, for example, there's an end of fossil fuels being used in this if we want to hit our climate targets. So the fear of movements like Gilets Jaunes happening again should not make us step down in climate ambition. On the other hand, it should be our driving motor, because we need to act now, and we have to look that everyone will have a better situation coming out if we change the frameworks. So this is basically our task now, to not make this happening by addressing the total question.
Now, if I could just inject one short point here.
Yeah.
The real challenge is a communication, because with such a complex set of legislation, one can pick up one element, show some negative consequence somewhere without quoting other elements which either compensate or contribute to remedy to the problem. So communicating the consequences of a very complex legislative package is real challenge. Over.
We get a point from you and you guys, and then we'll just go back to Brussels then to Commissioner Schmidt for the final.
I think we will need more funding in the Fit for 55 package and in the Just Transition package. And it's about government investment, fiscal and social support. So it's also the choices we make. Yeah? And are we going to support airlines and bail them out, or are we going to support more education and transition programs and education programs? And I find it, for example, super sad that we lost the UK for the Erasmus program of young people. And for what? For a fossil fuel, whatever, a nuclear technology, which is anyway at the end of its life, right? So these are important choices. And we should stand up and speak to our governments here that we want them to invest their money better. They should invest it in this Green Deal and in this transition, in this gender just green transition.
Invest your money better. Final comment from you?
Just completely agree with Sasha. Invest more in the skills for the future and the new jobs that we're going to need to drive this forward.
And Jim?
Yeah, I like the inclusion point that came out from that query, because, the International Labour Organization principles, the outcomes of a transition are important, but so is the process. And I think making people part of it, the example of the citizens' jury on climate change that took place in Scotland, I think is a good example. And we also picked out some very specific local examples around things like green participatory budgeting for local authorities, the creation of a community wealth fund, things like that bring it closer to the people, and it's not being communicated top down. The flow's got to be in both directions.
Okay, thank you so much, Jim Ski. And I'd now like to head back to Brussels and bring in the European Commissioner just for a final brief comment and to close this session on his takeaways from this.
Well, thank you. I think also that the word inclusion reflects exactly what we have to do. Because what are the questions people ask? And this is also one of the reasons of the Gilets Jaunes. Well, first, what about my job? Will I lose my job, and will I have new opportunities? And here we have to be very clear. We have to help people to find new jobs. We have to give them the possibilities to transit from one job to another. We have to give them the skills. This is true for those who have to change their jobs, but this is especially true also for young people, to show that the new green economy, sustainable economy is creating quality jobs. And this is broader than just the Green Deal. This is also about precariousness in the labor market and so on. So this is something which we have to tackle. And the second one is certainly, people ask, will I be able to pay my bill? And here I think we have to bring more social justice, more equality, better redistribution of wealth, social and fiscal support, especially to those who might not be able to pay their bills. But again, here also, there are a lot of issues which are not directly connected to the Green Deal. I take one example, housing, for instance. The housing prices have increased everywhere, or in most places in Europe. If you say, okay, we increase your wage, your minimum wage, but then house rents go up much more than the increase of your minimum wage. So we have to also to deal with this kind of issues. By the way, housing prices going up so rapidly means that people have to move away always further from their working place, which is not good for the environment and for climate, because then they very often have to take their car and they cannot pay for an electric car. So I think this is the comprehensive economic, social approach we have to put into this transition in order to make it fair and just and give the feeling to everybody that we take them along.
And the housing crisis, of course, that's a debate for another day. But for now, thank you so much, Commissioner Nicola Schmidt, speaking to us there from Brussels, to Jimsky here with us tonight at the COP, to Delara Burkhardt speaking to us from Berlin, Sasha Gabazon here on the panel, Laura Patterson and Piotr Szymanski speaking to us from the Netherlands, from the Research Centre. Thank you so much. And thank you to all of you for listening. And I'm sorry it wasn't very interactive and you're all wearing masks, not so pleasant, but thank you so much. And thank you to those who were watching us tonight online. Take care and enjoy the rest of COP26.